Disneyland is your land.
He comes seeking adventure as the old pirates, eh?
Make the jump to light speed.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
In the early 20th century, trains weren't just a means of transportation, they were a lifeline and critical to the development of the United States. Walt Disney's father, Elias, along with his uncle Mike, worked on the railroad, and this instigated Walt's fascination.
One of Walt's earliest jobs was as a news butcher for a few months in 1916, selling magazines and snacks on the Missouri Pacific, Kansas City Southern, and the Missouri Kansas Texas railroads. About this experience, Walt said, "My railroad career was brief, exciting, and unprofitable."
Little did he know that a number of his later successes would involve railroading in both his personal and professional lives. When the animation studio began to become successful, Walt was able to reconnect with his boyhood love of trains, and indeed so did several of his brilliant Imagineers.
In many ways, a model steam engine represents what makes Imagineering special. It requires precise technical knowledge of engines and metal fabrication combined with designed beautiful aesthetics and environments to create a fascinating and purposeful experience.
Walt was able to rekindle his love for trains through his friendships at the Walt Disney Company. Imagineers and Disney legends Ward Kimball and Ollie Johnson and Walt Disney all had a special bond with each other, and each were lifelong fans of trains, and each created some of the first and best backyard-scale railroads on the West Coast.
Most say it started with Ward Kimball, who was a Disney animator and one of Walt Disney's 9 old men. Among his many achievements was the creation of Jiminy Cricket. Ward started with buying a boxcar to house his miniature train collection and ended up purchasing a real steam engine.
And over time, and with the help of many studio employees, he spent 3 years restoring the engine to working order and building a 500-foot-long main line in his backyard. Now, it's a safe bet that Walt would not have built his own backyard railroad if not for attending a steam-up or a railroad-themed party at Ward Kimball's house in 1945, where Walt had the opportunity to pilot Ward's engine, the Emma Nevada.
It was the first time he had ridden in the cab of a train since his days working for the Missouri Pacific Railroad. He loved it.
In July of 1948, Walt boarded a train to attend the Chicago Railroad Fair, where he had been invited to participate in the Wheels a Rollin' pageant, where classic trains paraded by. Walt was deeply moved by the recreation of the funeral train for the president he most admired, Abraham Lincoln.
Walt also visited the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan on his way back to California and was impressed and inspired by the attractions of the stunning museum, which includes a scale locomotive that pulled guests around the estate.
Upon his return, it seemed that Walt had gone train crazy, and he put himself into finishing his own scale railroad. The little train made its debut at the studio Christmas party that same year, and then it was installed and operated in Walt's own backyard. He named it the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, and it was a big hit with friends and family, and it was something that Walt really loved.
When the idea for Mickey Mouse Park and then Disneyland came around, Walt loved the idea of having several railroads included. In fact, a rail encircling the entire park was included in every early concept.
So it made sense that a railroad was one of the first acquisitions that Walt sought to make for the park. But when a long-planned sale fell through, with the park opening not too far away, Walt ended up challenging his own skilled employees to design and fabricate their own train in-house.
By using the skills gained from Walt's miniature railroad and making it the exact size as Ward Kimball's backyard railroad, they came up with a plan and designed and fabricated not 1, but 2 steam engines.
At the park on opening day, 2 engines proudly paraded around the tracks, and they still do so today, though 3 others have been acquired, and Disneyland now has 5 narrow-gauge steam engines.
Engine number 1, the CK Holiday, was named after Cyrus Kurtz Holiday, founder of the Atchison-Topeka Railroad and Santa Fe Railroad, although the engine was known around the studio as Retlaw 1, which is Walter spelled backwards. Engine number 2 was named the E.P. Ripley.
In 1958, the Disneyland Railroad expanded with its 3rd steam engine, number 3, the Fred Gurley. Walt made this decision because 2 locomotives couldn't keep up with the demand for the attraction. The Fred Gurley is the oldest steam engine operating on the Disneyland Railroad. It was built by Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia in 1895.
Engine number 4, the Ernest S. Marsh, was added the following year on July 25, 1959, and was named for Ernest S. Marsh, the president of the Santa Fe Railroad at the time, though the engine was older, being built in 1925 by Baldwin Locomotive Works.
Nearly 50 years passed before the fifth steam engine would join the Disneyland Railroad. Engine number 5, the Ward Kimball, is unique among its fellow steam engines, as it was named not for an icon of the railroad, but for an icon of Walt Disney animation.
Disney legend Ward Kimball was proud to put the old 1902 engine into service at a ceremony in June of 2005. The Ward Kimball has a hidden Jiminy Cricket near the front of the engine that you can see from the passenger cars if you look hard enough.
The engines can be hooked up to any set of passenger cars, and Disneyland usually has 2 trains running with forward-facing seats and 2 trains with side-facing cars. At any point, any one of the engines could be pulling Lillian Disney's famous parlor car, named the Lily Bell, which was created as a VIP car for the train in 1974.
The stylish caboose has many elements designed by Lillian herself, who added family pictures and important items. She used the same stylish and luxurious Victorian charm she used when designing the Disney Studios apartment above the fire station on Main Street, USA. For both, she chose her signature classic cranberry red color theme.
It wasn't too long ago that the Lily Bell was open to the public on every ride, but now access is more limited. A reliable way to see it is to purchase a seat on the Grand Circle Tour, which we hope will be happening again fairly soon. The excellent guided tour includes a ride round the rails on the Lily Bell.
A lucky few can also sit up in the Tinder car of the railroad and chat with the engineers during the ride. Once the pandemic is over, this will return. All you have to do is ask a Main Street Station cast member, and if it's available, wait your turn and take a ride.
And we start our journey at Main Street Station. This iconic building is completely unpretentious and overwhelmingly charming. As you walk up the stairs, you get an amazing view of Town Square, where Walt gave his dedication speech at the park opening with his touching words, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land."
As you look across the tracks, you can see an old pump-style handcart built by the Kalamazoo Manufacturing Company, which was picked out by Walt himself in 1958. Main Street Station is a fine example of Second Empire-style architecture popular in North America in the late 19th century. Of the 4 train stations in the park, only the depots at Main Street and New Orleans Square are designed as nostalgic stations from America's past.
In fact, when the park opened, there were only those 2 train stations, and each one had a dedicated train that would make a full circle tour, returning guests to the same place from which they left. The Main Street Station had seated cars, but the Frontierland Station famously had cattle cars, in which guests would stand for the ride.
When a 3rd station was added a year later, the trains made more stops and began to be used not only as an attraction, but also as a way to get around the park.
Here we go! As the train pulls out from the station, you are riding the first attraction to become operable in Disneyland. The tracks follow the crest of a 12-foot berm that creates the perimeter of the park that was designed to maintain sight lines and keep the Disney magic inside and the rest of the world outside.
During the ride, I think it's fascinating to consider as Disneyland has grown, the railroad has been a significant influence on the design of several major park attractions. The spatial challenge of having to build show buildings and lands outside of the railroad's path has impacted and shaped Disneyland.
If it was not for the railroad, we might not have the first half of Pirates of the Caribbean, as the caves and tunnels travel guests through the basement and out under the railroad into the main show building.
Without the railroads, we might not have the stretching room in the Haunted Mansion, which in some ways is just a clever solution for traveling guests down and under the railroad to the main show building. Or what about the amazing immersive queue of Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye designed to do the same thing?
Or how about how the train's path and view was considered in the designs of Splash Mountain and It's a Small World, and how much ambiance the railroad adds to both of those attractions? We think in a roundabout way, the train has benefited the design of many signature attractions by providing the right obstacle for the Imagineers to overcome.
After leaving Main Street Station, the first stop on the Disneyland Railroad is New Orleans Square. The station features a number of buildings, including a functional water tower and a loading platform. Across the tracks from the loading station is the original Frontierland Depot.
It is a replica from the depot featured in the 1949 Disney film So Dear to My Heart. Walt Disney initially wanted to reuse the actual set piece that had been built for the film, but when he learned that Imagineer Ward Kimball had already installed it in his backyard for his railroad, Walt asked his designers to build a new one just like it.
As you wait for a train, you'll hear a telegraph clicking away. This is actually Walt Disney's opening day dedication speech being sent via Morse code out on all the wires. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world.
As we now head out through Critter Country, rounding the rivers of America, be sure to enjoy the most pastoral and beautiful part of your journey. Guests can take in the landscapes inspired by 4 of America's majestic rivers, the Mississippi, the Columbia, the Missouri, and the Rio Grande.
The northern border of the park used to be completely straight, and the train passed just north of the Living Desert and the Storybook Land canal boats. But added attractions and lands have changed that. When Galaxy's Edge was constructed, the train was rerouted, and it now makes a slight left turn to veer around the Resistance Forest.
There used to be a Fantasyland railroad station from 1956 to 1966. The station had a festive pitched roof, and it was themed as a medieval court, just like the rest of the land at the time.
The Fantasyland station was removed to make room for It's a Small World in 1966, and years later, another was built nearby, coinciding with the opening of the Fantasyland Theater and Videopolis in 1985. It was rebuilt as the Toontown station when Mickey's Toontown opened in 1993.
If you've ever thought the Toontown train depot looked familiar, there's a reason. The station is an identical but stylized cartoon version of the New Orleans Square station. The station has a luggage area with the themed suitcases of Mickey and his pals.
As you head out from Toontown Station, you'll pass right through the brilliant facade of It's a Small World, allowing you to look down onto the animal topiaries and wave at the guests entering the famous boat ride. It's another magic moment.
The next section is themed to the scientifically driven agricultural world of tomorrow. You also pass by the monorail tracks and the defunct People Mover tracks, while getting some peekaboo views of Autopia.
The Viewliner, the fastest miniature train in the world, used to operate alongside the Disneyland Railroad in this area from 1957 and 1959, but it was removed to make room for the Matterhorn, motorboat cruise, submarine voyage, and monorail expansion.
The Disneyland Railroad makes one more stop in Tomorrowland before completing its tour, dropping guests off in the future before heading back to the past. The station is not too much more than a covered platform. It's essentially unchanged from when it was added to the line in 1958.
As you leave Tomorrowland Station and head back on your journey to Main Street, you get a theatrical and historical treat, a trip through the Grand Canyon and Primeval World attractions.
The Grand Canyon diorama was added in 1958, and it was the first enclosed attraction on the line, depicting scenes from the Grand Canyon in epic style. In 1966, the Primeval World was added to it, including several large animatronic dinosaurs that had been used in Disney's exhibits at the 1964 World's Fair.
This magical section of the ride, opened years before Jurassic Park was even a thought, has provided many guests with their earliest dinosaur memories.
As we pull back into the Main Street station, completing the full Grand Circle tour, we here at the Disneyland Beat have a new appreciation for the Disneyland Railroad, and for the love, the respect, the knowledge, passion, and creative energy that went into making it.
And we remember the young boy who loved railroads that made it all happen. To us, the railroad is the exposition for every adventure to be had at Disneyland.
That's it for us today. See you real soon, Mouseketeers.
See you real soon. The Matterhorn bobsleds attraction was installed in Disneyland. It stood as the tallest structure in all of Orange County, rising to a towering 147 feet.
The Disneyland version is actually just 1/100th the scale of the peak after which it is modeled, the formidable Matterhorn of the Swiss Alps, a perfect fit for Fantasyland.
The first time I visited Disneyland was magical. Having grown up on the East Coast, I was quite familiar with the Magic Kingdom and the Walt Disney World parks, but I didn't know much about the large mountain looming on the horizon. What was its story?
Well, that begins before construction on the attraction actually commenced. Following World War II, the Walt Disney Studios stepped out significantly by initiating production on live action films and documentaries.
And they did it right. The first entirely live-action film was Treasure Island, premiering in 1950. The film was also a first for the Disney Company in that it was filmed abroad in England.
Walt had traveled to Switzerland on holiday on a number of occasions, and he felt a deep appreciation for the alpine setting and the folk traditions of the Swiss people.
The beauty of the Swiss landscape and the fascinating local customs was even explored in the short subject documentary Switzerland for the studio's People and Places series in 1955.
In 1956, production began on the not-too-often-remembered film Third Man on the Mountain. It was decided it would be filmed in Zermatt, Switzerland.
While visiting the set in 1958, Walt became fascinated with the peak which towered over the famous ski village, the same mountain around which the film was centered.
He spent 3 weeks there with his family, getting around with a Tyrolean hat and a walking stick.
He was struck by the Matterhorn, one of the most imposing peaks of the Swiss Alps. The striking alpine summit captivated Walt's imagination.
And in a moment of inspiration, impressed by the beauty of the real Matterhorn, Walt grabbed a postcard of the mountain from a souvenir stand and sent it back to Imagineer and architect Vic Green with the message, "Vic, build this. Walt."
And this started a process that resulted in the merger of an earlier toboggan ride concept with the idea for a bobsled coaster ride that would run around and through the structure. The peak was first shown in a conceptual drawing that was once on display at the Disney Gallery.
We think that it is quite important to Disney parks that the Matterhorn bobsleds were developed and opened in Walt Disney's lifetime. His personal influence on what would separate a Disney coaster from traditional coasters, it has made all the difference.
The attraction was to be constructed in the area between Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. This area had previously been occupied by a mound of piled earth left over from the excavation of the moat around Sleeping Beauty's castle.
The area, once dubbed Holiday Hill and then later Lookout Mountain, had been improved with benches and pathways to encourage its use as a picnic area.
Not long after the park had opened, Walt Disney conceived the idea of a toboggan ride on the mountain with real snow. He wanted Disneyland to have all the seasons at once.
But the logistics of generating real snow caused vehement and stubborn objections by Disneyland construction chief Joe Fowler. It was in this period that the hill began to be known as Snow Hill.
And instead of being a place for picnicking, the hill came to be used primarily as a nighttime lover's lane, much to Disney's dismay. But it would be kind of cool to tell people I used to make out on Snow Hill at Disneyland.
The Matterhorn was a revolutionary coaster, but it did have some obvious influences.
First, it has a striking resemblance to one of the oldest roller coasters in the world, the Rutsjebenen, still in operation at Tivoli Gardens in Denmark.
While it features more traditional dips to leap, which really look fun by the way, it has an icy theme with caves and even an abominable snowman.
Also, in the 1950s, Wild Mouse-style roller coasters were beginning to be developed and got the attention of Disneyland executives, who began to consider applying this emerging technology to the creation of a toboggan-themed coaster ride on an artificial mountain at the site.
Construction of the Mighty Mountain began in 1958, and it opened along with the monorail and the submarine voyage in June of 1959.
The attraction's designers faced a significant challenge during construction because of the Skyway, which was a gondola that transported guests between Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. The mountain structure had to be built with large cave-like openings in the mountain so it could pass through.
Fortunately, this solution made for a more interesting Skyway experience by creating the illusion of traveling a greater distance.
Built by coaster builder Aero Development and WED Imagineering, it was the first tubular steel roller coaster in the world. The mountain itself consisted of a wood and steel infrastructure surrounded by man-made concrete and rock.
It is also the first roller coaster with an electric dispatch system and sensors placed throughout the ride that allow multiple trains to operate on a single track at the same time. This innovation is taken for granted today, but it was revolutionary at the time, allowing large crowds in Disneyland all to be able to enjoy the ride in a day.
During early test runs of the attraction, operators spread a large amount of hay towards the end of the track to reduce the speed of the bobsleds as they returned to the reloading area. Though hay was not a permanent solution, the ride needed something to slow the speed of the bobsleds near the end of the track.
Eventually, the Imagineers replaced the hay with a pool of water meant to resemble an alpine lake. The water slowed the landing and resulted in what is now the famous bobsled splashdown, one of the most photographed moments in the park and one that we have not seen repeated in other coasters.
The whole thing uses forced perspective. Trees on the side of the Matterhorn get smaller in scale as they get closer to the top, making the mountain seem much taller than it is. During popular seasons, real mountain climbers climb the Matterhorn, sometimes planting a flag and then rappelling back down to the ground. It's really quite exciting to watch.
The Matterhorn was designed with 2 tracks, and as you can see in this image, they twist and turn around each other, giving you 2 different experiences, and perhaps more importantly, a reason to come back again.
As you can see in this image, the Matterhorn is made of steel beams with a wooden outer shell that holds metal lath upon which was sprayed plaster and cement. The top third of the mountain is actually unused by the roller coaster and famously houses a fairly large room with a staircase upon which a cast member placed a basketball hoop leading to the fun Disney story of the basketball court inside the Matterhorn.
From all accounts, it's still there, But for quite a while now, the room has been involved in the nighttime fireworks show, flying Tinker Bell and occasionally other Disney characters from the Matterhorn to past Sleeping Beauty's castle.
The guests that got to ride the Matterhorn bobsleds in 1959 had a very different ride experience than the one that we have today, although today's version is closer to Walt's original vision for the attraction.
While the exterior of the mountain was finished in great detail, tight budgets and time constraints left the interior of the mountain almost bare.
At some point early on, the metal beams were wrapped with burlap to try and take away the industrial feel of the interior of the mountain, which was somewhat effective, but got pretty smelly.
The Swiss mountain was also a little bit like a big piece of Swiss cheese, with lots of holes which the coasters would pop in and out of. Over the years, these have been reduced to give the mountain a more solid Edam or sharp cheddar look.
And waterfalls fell closer to the track somehow, splashing the riders.
The original vehicle sat 4 people, 2 to a seat, couple style, and each car took the ride solo, no trains.
They looked almost exactly like the original Walt Disney World Space Mountain vehicles.
In 1961, Walt had the idea of placing a huge revolving star on top of the Matterhorn for the holiday season, and it was so popular it stayed until 1971.
It must have been some great local marketing, as it was the tallest and brightest thing in Anaheim for some time.
In 1978, after almost 20 years, the Matterhorn received a major refurbishment. Most notably, the hollow interior space was broken up into a number of small icy caves and tunnels with far more convincing theming. Some holes in the mountain's skin were filled in, including the 2 large openings at the top of the lift hill that had allowed guests to briefly glimpse the entire southern portion of the park.
Another major addition in '78 was an abominable snowman that took up residence in the mountain and was affectionately named Harold. The creature exists as 3 similar audio animatronic figures that roar at the bobsledders on their journey down the mountain. These super loud roars can be heard from ground level as well, even over the recorded howling of the alpine wind.
The bobsleds themselves were changed to white cars decorated with orange and red stripes, and from a single car to 2 cars connected to each other to form a train.
After many years of service, the Skyway closed in 1994, and the holes were filled up on the side of the mountain. The large space where the Skyway went through was changed into the Glacier Grotto scene.
And we can only assume that the Skyway support pole is still inside, holding up the mountain.
It was 2012 when the lap rider setup on the ride vehicles was changed to the 3 single riders we know today, a trend that happened in most parks across the country much earlier.
Also in 2012, a major painting refurbishment for the mountain had to happen. After 50 years of repainting and touch-up, the mountain had become almost completely white.
The entire mountain was repainted to darker, more realistic rock tones with snowy highlights.
The snow on the mountain's surface in the past was merely white paint, but for the refurbished ride, glass beads were mixed into the paint so that the snow would reflect sunlight as actual snow does. Imagineer Jim Crouch served as the field art director over the rehab project. The mountain climbers also returned after the refurbishment.
In 2015, the attraction was closed for an extended refurbishment to prepare for the park's 60th anniversary. It reopened several months later with new special effects and updated animatronics.
Now on the lift hills, an animated image of the abominable snowman can be seen through the ice, and it's absolutely terrifying.
And Harold may roar and yell a lot, but really, inside, I know he's a total sweetheart.
The new animatronic versions of Harold with improved sound effects really did a lot to add to the story of the ride, and it made the whole thing much more exciting.
The Matterhorn bobsleds have never been brought to another Disney park, though you never say never.
Several early pitches were made to bring the iconic mountain to Walt Disney World, with it almost becoming part of the Swiss Pavilion at Epcot.
But certainly the epic Expedition Everest at Animal Kingdom pays homage to the original, featuring another famous Yeti. He's just a bit bigger.
Today, at over 60 years old, the mountain is still one of the most popular rides in the park. It is known for its thrills
and long lines.
But they actually move pretty well, and Fast Pass and Single Rider are always very effective ways to get on the ride quickly.
In 2018, the queue was expanded with some lovely new decor and trees, creating switchbacks instead of having the line wrap all the way around the mountain.
And we certainly hope that this famous mountain is only ever upgraded and improved upon moving forward.
Well, Mouseketeers, that's it for today.
We hope you find some Disneyland magic in your everyday.
See you real soon.
See you real soon. 1946 was a good year to be making movies. The Second World War had brought hardship and suffering to millions of people across the globe. Wanting to move on and enjoy some well-earned holidays, the distressed public on the home front escaped to the movie theaters in droves. In 1946, 19 pictures topped $4 million at the U.S. box office. Prior to that, only 25 pictures had achieved that in the entire history of Hollywood.
Unfortunately for Walt Disney, it looked like he might not have been invited to the party. The pre-war years had seen the studio soar to great heights with Walt at the helm as its father figure. The studio had produced the first animated short to boast synchronized sound, as well as the first feature to use the innovative Technicolor process. In 1937, Disney had released the first seriously considered animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film raked in a then huge $7.8 million during its initial theatrical run. The critics raved about it, the public loved it, and it seemed that Disney could do no wrong.
Then came the war. The progressive and luxurious Disney studio complex was used by the United States military, and the animators, those who had not joined the military for active duty, were put to work on producing training and propaganda films for the war effort. The government did compensate the studio, but it barely covered expenses, and the work consumed the studio entirely.
The war ended and the studio had changed. Disney's product seemed to have fallen out of favor with the American public, and MGM and Warner Brothers had successfully moved into the animation field, creating Disney's first serious competitors. By the end of 1946, the company was in debt and laid off almost half of its 1,000 employees. Later, Walt would recall, after the war was over, we were like a bear coming out of hibernation. We were skinny and gaunt, and we had no fat on our bones. Those were lost years for us.
At the time, few could have predicted the path that Walt would take to revive both his company and his creative spirits. Looking back, it seems like the obvious choice for a person like Walt Disney. His movies had always been about fantasy, and they presented places far away from the world's current problems where your wishes came true. Why not make them real?
While people may like to point to a single incident or location that led to Walt choosing to pursue building a theme park, there was no single thing. Instead, it appears the creation of the Mickey Mouse Park was the result of his interest in 3 separate but loosely related hobbies outside of his role as the head of an animation studio. Over a period of more than a decade, these gradually coalesced into one of the most ambitious, risky, and magical projects any entertainment business has ever undertaken.
The first of these interests was a fascination with trains that was with Walt his whole life. As a child, his family lived on a farm in Marceline, Missouri, where the tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad ran nearby. Walt would put his ear to the rail to listen out for approaching trains, and sometimes the engineer on those trains would be his uncle, Mike Martin, who would bring a bag of hard stick candy with him.
Struggling as farmers, the family moved to Kansas City in 1910. Walt's father, Elias, bought a newspaper distributorship with the money from selling the farm, and Walt was busy from then on as a delivery boy. His love of trains remained, and in 1917, his older brother Roy lent him the $15 bond needed to take a job as a news butcher for the Santa Fe Railroad. He ended up losing his brother's money, but he did enjoy traveling along the many rail lines to cities in half a dozen states.
The pressures of running the studio caused Walt to collapse in what was diagnosed as a nervous breakdown in 1931. Doctors ordered him to take up a hobby and get some exercise, and he chose polo because of his love of horses, despite the objections of Lillian. But a serious back injury in 1938 forced him to consider other hobbies, and this is when trains became of great interest again.
In 1945, Ward Kimball, one of Disney's best animators and sequence directors, invited his boss to a steam-in party at his house. To Walt's surprise, he found that Kimball had a narrow-gauge railway running through his backyard, which he had named the Grizzly Flats Railroad. It had a restored steam engine locomotive, the Emma Nevada, and Kimball persuaded Walt to take a turn at operating it. The experience made a huge impression on him.
In 1948, it was suggested to Walt that he should take a vacation, and he chose the Chicago Railroad Fair. He brought his fellow steamer and animator from the studio, Ward Kimball, with him, and Walt attended the event with more than 100,000 other railway fanatics. The pair explored a series of themed villages, each representing a different tourist destination at the fair. They also visited the impressive Henry Ford Museum, which had a passenger train, carousel, and stern-wheeled paddle boat operating on the grounds for guest amusement. On his return home, Walt confessed to his wife Lillian, "That was the most fun I ever had in my life."
Walt was probably a bit jealous of his friend's backyard railroad and determined to build one of his own. Work soon began on the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, which ran for a half-mile around Walt's new Holmby Hills property. Walt named the engine the Lily Bell to help placate Lillian, who was less than enthusiastic about the project.
Miniature trains were not the only small-scale replicas of real-world objects that captured Walt's imagination. At the same time, he was collecting new scenic elements for his epic miniature office railroad. He had the big idea of creating miniature scenes that could be displayed in large cases and toured all over the country. He even had a name for the tour, Disneylandia. Walt tasked layout artist Ken Anderson to draw 24 scenes of life in an old western town. Then he said, "I'll carve the figures and make the scenes in miniature."
Walt really put himself into the project, creating tiny chairs by bending wood in his family's pressure cooker. A narration was recorded and the project grew, but as it did, he realized that Anderson's scenes were too complex for him to produce on his own. He also felt something was missing: movement.
In 1949, Walt bought a mechanical caged bird during a visit to New Orleans. The bird would move its tail and beak and also tweeted out a song. Charmed and impressed, Walt had his engineers take it apart to find out how it worked. And after dismantling the bird, they found that its mechanisms consisted of clockworks and a double bellows.
Coming back to his office miniatures, Walt wanted to create a scene of a frontier music hall complete with an entertainer performing a dance. He even hired actor Buddy Epson to dance on camera so his technical team could copy his movement in detail. Walt's team completed the project utilizing a series of cams and cables hidden by curtains. Once it became clear the Disneylandia project would not turn a significant profit as a touring display, Walt's interests began to turn elsewhere.
Another huge influence on the creation of the Mickey Mouse Park was simply Walt's love of amusement parks. As a child growing up in Kansas City, Walt had frequently visited Electric Park, which was located just 15 blocks from the family home, so he was a park kid himself. As early as 1920, Walt is noted as saying, "One of these days I'm going to build an amusement park, and it's going to be clean."
After he became a father, Walt regularly took his daughters Diane and Sharon to Griffith Park in Los Angeles on Saturdays. In a 1963 interview seen in the Walt Disney Story, he recalled, "I'd take them to the merry-go-round, sit on a bench, eating peanuts. I felt there should be something built where the parents and the children could have fun together." When researching for Disneyland, he and his team visited dozens of amusement parks, including those in Coney Island in New York and Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California. And he was known for grilling the operators, staff, and even visitors with questions.
In the summer of 1951, Walt toured Europe with Lillian and visited the famous Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. The park dates back to the 19th century and even has an icy mountain-themed roller coaster. He was impressed by the cleanliness of the park, the beauty of the surroundings, the quality of the dining, and the professionalism and positive manner of the employees. It was a world away from what he had experienced at Coney Island. Now this is what an amusement place should be, Lillian.
Upon his return, an excited Walt asked Harper Goff, an art director at the studio and future designer of the Jungle Cruise, to produce the preliminary sketches for a small theme park. These were expanded upon with drawings by architect John Cowles and animator Don DeGrati to create a complete package for a park which Walt named the Mickey Mouse Park. It was to be located on the studio grounds.
The park was designed to be small, family-friendly, and would intentionally differ from typical amusement parks of the era. Instead of concrete and high-throw roller coasters, it would offer grassy areas, picnic tables, water features, and mild rides that could be enjoyed by young and old guests together.
The central area of the park was a village set at the turn of the century, which was clearly a precursor to Main Street USA at Disneyland. This village was built around a large green with a railroad station at one end and the town hall at the other. The village green would host benches, a bandstand, a drinking fountain, trees, and shrubs. Walt described it as a place for people to sit and rest. Mothers and grandmothers can watch over small children at play. It would be relaxing, cool, and inviting.
The village had a fire station, a police station, and a selection of shops. All of these would be put to practical use, rather than being simply for show. At the police station, guests could report lost articles and lost children. Walt even suggested that it could contain a small jail that guests could look into. The retail outlets would be representative of a typical American town in the early 20th century. The candy store would feature an attached factory where guests could watch old-fashioned sweet goods get produced. And Disney artists would be able to sell their works in the stores.
An opera house was to host a large, well-appointed movie theater that could also be used for radio and television broadcasts. Food would be available at a colorful hot dog and ice cream stand and at a restaurant with private rooms for birthday parties. Statues of Disney characters would add to the ambiance throughout. A large section of the park would also be given over to a lake with an island in the middle circled by a stern-wheeled riverboat.
A horse-drawn streetcar would carry guests to an Old West town. This would host a general store selling cowboy items, a pony ring, a stagecoach ride, a donkey pack train, and possibly a movie theater showing westerns. A frontier museum was also considered, as well as a small settlement of Native American teepees.
From the Western Village, guests could board horse-drawn surreys. These could carry them through an old-fashioned farm to a carnival area. Perhaps surprisingly, given Walt's dislike for traditional amusement parks, this would be populated by roller coasters, merry-go-rounds, and typical Midway stuff according to a memo he wrote. By the time Walt submitted his plans, the rides had become much more ambitious. They included a canal boat ride, a mock spaceship, and a submarine ride.
The plans and sketches for Mickey Mouse Park were presented in March of 1952. The Parks and Recreation Board approved the plans, but the City Council subsequently rejected them, with one councilman proclaiming, "We don't want the carny atmosphere in Burbank. We don't want people falling in the river or merry-go-round squawking all day long."
Walt was dismayed, but by this stage, Burbank's rejection was more of a side note than a setback. Walt's ideas had outgrown the small site identified for Mickey Mouse Park. As early as 4 months prior to the council's decision, he had confided to an RKO official that he had been looking into the advisability of securing a plot of ground, something up to 200 acres, for a larger project.
Mickey Mouse Park never came to be. It had been conceived as a combination of elements from Knott's Berry Farm, heritage parks, and traditional carnivals. Disneyland was undoubtedly significantly more ambitious, with its careful selection of multiple themed lands and coherent transitions between them.
But the next time you visit a theme park, think about the influence that this ambitious little project has had on an industry that now entertains hundreds of millions of guests every year. Elements of Mickey Mouse Park live on in Disneyland, and we hope they live on forever.
Somewhere in the American Southwest in the 1880s, a group of miners and explorers working the mountains discovered gold by a large ridge filled with colorful rocks amongst the towering hoodoos. They founded a town around the claim and a nearby waterfall and called it Rainbow Ridge. The town eventually grew and prospered, and a large mining operation was built. The Big Thunder Mining Company was set up with a series of long mine cart trains to transport the ore out of the mountain. The settlers soon came to discover, however, that the mountain was sacred to the local indigenous population, and the mine was cursed. Before long, tragedy befell the mining company, and the mountain unleashed an earthquake, causing the mine cars to come alive and run themselves through the mountain. Waterfalls rushed unexpectedly. The animals began to act strangely. Ancient bones were uncovered, and dynamite ignited itself. The few remaining residents of Rainbow Ridge, down to 38 from 2015 original sturdy souls, set up a station by the camp where the mine cars came by, allowing visitors who dare to take a ride on the possessed trains. It's an experience you'll never forget. Hi there, Mouseketeers. I hope you enjoyed this look at the history and backstory of one of everybody's favorite attraction, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. If you like this video, then you won't want to miss out on the next one. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment. Most Disneyland fans of age will remember when Frontierland was changed forever in 1977. The park closed a long-time fan-favorite area of the park in Frontierland that was themed like a fantastic western wilderness, complete with a painted desert and an Old West mountain town, and it housed 3 rides. Those were the Conestoga wagons, where you could ride inside a horse-drawn carriage to go see the scenery, also the Pack Mules, where trains of real mules were ridden, and the e-ticket attraction Nature's Mine Train Through Wonderland, where you rode a train through the scenery with music and narration, climaxing in a trip through Rainbow Caverns with its many colorful fountains and cascades. This attraction was in place from 1960 to 1977 and was very popular and is still a cult classic, having many fans to this day. In place of that attraction, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad was created, and we have all come to love it. It's a super fun, immersive themed roller coaster. It's just perfect for the first real roller coaster for young kids, but it remains charming and fun no matter what your age is. A young designer who was destined to herald the next generation of Imagineers, Tony Baxter got the idea for Big Thunder from working with veteran Imagineer Marc Davis, who was far into production on his own and ultimately unrealized project meant for Walt Disney World, the Western River Expedition. The Western River Exposition was actually just a part of the grand Western Pavilion called Thunder Mesa that Marc Davis had designed. In many ways, the idea was similar to Disneyland's collection of attractions around the Mine Train through Wonderland. It had a wagon ride and mule rides, and a Western-themed boat ride as its e-ticket star. Baxter originally proposed Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in 1972. He had only been hired by WED Enterprises in 1970, having started as an ice cream scooper at Disneyland only 5 years earlier. His arrival at WED, timing with the building of Walt Disney World, rocketed him into an amazing Disney career, and he has created many of our fan-favorite park attractions. Disney wanted to expand Frontierland in Walt Disney World, but was building Pirates of the Caribbean at that time, so they were waiting. And as it turned out, Tony Baxter with Big Thunder Mountain came into direct competition with Marc Davis and Thunder Mesa, and it was going to be built on the exact same land. Marc Davis was very passionate about his River Expedition project, and it looked like there was really only going to be budget for one. Now, Marc Davis had worked on his River Expedition project for years, and it was practically through pre-production. It was intended to be his East Coast answer to Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean originally, and was an elaborate ride with many animatronic figures. Unfortunately, for Marc Davis anyhow, and after what was apparently some bargaining on the part of Davis, the powers that be had deemed the project was too expensive, and instead they greenlit Big Thunder Mountain Railroad on the same exact land. He tried to salvage the project by making the River Ride a companion attraction to the roller coaster and letting go of the rest of the Mesa. Tony Baxter, wanting to work with and stay friends with Marc Davis, went along with this idea, and he even created a model seen here with the show building in it. But, as we all know, this was not to be. I think perhaps this was for the best. Take a look at this. While Marc Davis had some nice elements to his attractions, the poor representation of Native Americans and seemingly racist tropes in the ride would not have stood the test of time. Back to the story. Disney was finally ready to bring family-friendly thrill rides into the parks and had decided that Walt Disney World would get a roller coaster first. It did not have a thrill attraction to boast like Disneyland's Matterhorn. However, Space Mountain ended up being the first roller coaster built. But, all of a sudden, in a very productive period between 1974 and 1979, we did get a Space Mountain and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in both Walt Disney World and Disneyland. Tony Baxter and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad were put on hold several times, but during that time, Baxter and his team were delayed, computer technology improved, and it ended up being used for the first time on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in the design and engineering of the roller coaster track. The construction process was meticulous and took 2 years to complete. The steel, wood, and concrete structures began to take shape and were visible around all of Frontierland, and the entire mountaintops were craned into place. A faithful replica of the Rainbow Ridge town used in Nature's Mine Train was created and incorporated into the theming for the ride. In 1979, it opened to the public. In 1980, it opened at Walt Disney World and has since opened at Disneyland Paris and Tokyo Disneyland. The original opening was a huge Western-themed celebration in which Mickey unlocked a huge padlock and chain to let the crowds into what has become one of the most popular rides in the park. The attraction was a huge part of launching Tony Baxter's career. The original ride took 4 years to plan and 2 years to build and has gone on to be opened at 4 other parks, each with their own version of the backstory and variation on the ride. His work and attention to detail is unparalleled. A replica of the model he created with his team is on display at the Disneyland Hotel and has been for a number of years. It is an amazing model. The original Disneyland roller coaster ride is fairly long and has 3 lift hills, which allows multiple trains to operate. 5 trains, in fact, named You Be Bold, You Are Courageous, I Am Loco, I Be Hardy, and You Are Daring. This ride processes crowds very quickly, and can be compared to rides like Pirates of the Caribbean, which can handle thousands of people an hour. I'm not entirely sure why it was made into a Fast Pass ride, to be honest. If there was no Fast Pass on this one, I imagine the wait would rarely get over 25 minutes. But it's a great ride to go ahead and walk on. As you walk down the curved queue, you descend down from the Frontierland Plaza behind rocks, trees, and boulders, immersing you into the world of the ride. There are no signs telling you a complete backstory, but rather guests pick it up in pieces from the various show elements, bit by bit. Once you have descended into the gulch, you are surrounded by the train track. On one side, you can see the town of Rainbow Ridge, a recreation of the town that once inhabited the former attraction set on a hillside. In scaled, forced perspective, similar to Main Street, USA, this town is alive with sounds and sights. At the end of the ride, the roller coaster train rests right in front of the town for a moment, and you can hear what is going on in each building. One window of note is dedicated to Willard P. Bounds, U.S. Marshal. This was Lillian Disney's father, who was once a U.S. Marshal on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation in Idaho. From the line, you can also see the skeleton of a dinosaur, rushing with water, and the train station. As you head up the rockin' wood stairs to the station and board your car in pairs, or 3 if you have a little one, you hear one of the funnest intro speeches in the park.
Howdy, folks. Please keep your hands and arms inside the train and remain seated at all times. Now then, hang on to them hats and glasses, 'cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
At first you take off into a cave with bat sounds, and up into the first lift hill. On this hill, we see a waterfall form over the tracks, only to split and avoid us right as we go under it. You can reach out your hand and touch the water. On the left, the cave is full of interesting rock formations and bubbling, glowing mud pots below. We zip out of the first drop into a mountain scene inspired by Bryce Canyon, with towering hoodoos and tight canyons. While this ride has no inversions, or even a major drop, it does turn and dip quickly many times into tunnels and provides quite a thrill. As you drop down, you see coyotes for a second before you are plunged into darkness with their howls ringing in your ears. You are taken outside again for the second lift hill, where you can see lots of cool mechanisms powering the train lift and many cute animal animatronics. Famously, as you crest the hill, you see a goat on the right chewing a stick of dynamite as you drop into a tight helix and around the next curve. The final lift hill is enclosed, and is different than it once was. Originally, the walls had rocks that would quiver and quake. They moved quite violently, until a minor guest injury toned that down significantly. After a major overhaul completed in 2014, it was changed to what we have today, which is really an exciting climax. As you work your way up the hill, you see a hurricane lantern has broken, and the flames ignite a fuse, and you see that travel all the way up the hill with you, to where, of course, a large pile of dynamite is sitting right over the big drop. Explosions of smoke and some really clever projection mapping make this effect stand out from the rest of the ride. Also worth noting, in 2014 during the extended refurbishment, 75% of the track was replaced, along with the trains and much of the structure and the town of Rainbow Ridge. Disney wisely decided not to make any other major changes to the ride at this time. Big Thunder has some really fun facts that go along with it. For one, a study was done in 2016 suggesting that if you want to pass a kidney stone, come ride Big Thunder. A scientist, with Disney's permission, rode the ride several times with a 3D model of a kidney, and 70% of the time, the kidney stone passed. Interesting when this is compared to only 5% of the time when riding the Matterhorn. The backstory of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad changes slightly in the different parks. The Orlando version is more detailed and even names a founder of Big Thunder Mining Company, one Barnabas T. Bullion, a villainous-type character who continues to dig more mine shafts even though the mountain has risen up against him in protest. This is Tony Baxter as Barnabas in the art. The story in Disneyland Paris goes even further, linking the railroad's backstory with that of the Phantom Manor, which is Disneyland Paris's haunted mansion. That version is particularly cool, as the roller coaster exists on an island in the middle of the Rivers of the Far West, it's called, and the coaster shoots through a tunnel under the river to get through it. But for those of us here at the Disneyland beat, nothing will ever touch the original where the mold was cast. Open at Disneyland for 40 years, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is one of Disneyland's finest attractions and one of the funnest experiences in the parks. My question to all of you out there is, what is your favorite Big Thunder Mountain Railroad memory? Please let us know in the comments.
Radiator Springs Racers is a slot car ride in Cars Land at Disney California Adventure, and it's my favorite ride in the park. Disney has paved a parking lot and put up a paradise.
The attraction features a third-generation version of transport technology originally developed for the test track attraction at Epcot in Walt Disney World.
At a cost of over $200 million, the attraction was the most expensive at Disneyland Resort at the time of its construction, and it's still one of the most expensive theme park attractions in the world ever built. It accounted for about 18% of the entire cost of the $1.1 billion expansion of DCA.
Cars was a huge hit at the time. It was the last film that Pixar made prior to Disney's acquisition of the company, and while the film pulled in $450 million, its merchandise had made close to $10 billion at that point.
And Imagineers had been developing a land for the newer California park based on Cars called Car Land, no S, at the same time. With the popularity of the new Pixar property, it seemed inevitable that the two ideas would merge, and Cars Land was greenlit.
Radiator Springs Racers, along with the rest of the Disney California Adventure 2.0 multi-year expansion, was announced on October 17, 2007. However, the first indication of the attraction in the new land was some concept art published in the Dreaming section of the Walt Disney Company's 2006 annual report.
The ride takes guests in a 6-person vehicle through encounters with characters from the film series Cars. Guests then race another vehicle through turns and hills, ending with a race you never know who's going to win.
By late 2009, construction on the ride and the land within it began and was finished 2.5 years later. At the What's Next presentation at Disney California Adventure on June 11, 2010, Imagineer Kathy Mangum gave a brief rundown of the attraction's storyline.
Ride testing began in early 2012 with soft openings the following spring. The ride officially opened to the public on June 15, 2012 with wait times of up to 6 hours. The line would stretch towards Paradise Pier at the time, bypassing Cars Land entirely. Today, the line still often stretches halfway down Route 66.
The historic Route 66 runs 2,448 miles from Chicago to Los Angeles. Route 66 in Cars Land is approximately 525 feet long and 23 feet wide, rich with inspiration from the actual American highway.
Bringing Radiator Springs Racers to life was no small feat. Imagineer Jim Cairns talks about the process. He said, "We used a lot of pre-visualization, where we'll model in 3D, especially the Radiator Springs Racers ride. Then we'll go into this virtual reality environment to previs what the ride is going to look like well before construction is started."
Imagineers actually used a video game engine to help transfer the world from within a computer world into a theme park. The fact that the assets were all saved digitally by Pixar creatives made the transition and game engine workflow much more fluid.
Disney Imagineers used a pre-visualization technique called the Cave, a Cave automatic virtual environment technology, which they've modified and called the Dish, a digital immersive showroom. The creative director of Walt Disney Imagineering at the time, Tom Morris, said his teams used that technology to create environments and worlds early in the design process so they can experience it in a way that the guest will experience it.
The Dish was used to construct the Cadillac Mountain Range in Ornament Valley, which stands approximately 125 feet tall at its highest peak, the Pinnacle. The peaks of the mountain range from left to right represent Cadillac tail fins from 1957, 1958, 1959, the Pinnacle, 1960, 1961, and 1962.
At nearly 300,000 square feet, the mountain range is the largest rockwork construction in any domestic Disney theme park. Some people think that mountains are formed by plate tectonics, a process that usually takes millions of years.
When it came to building Ornament Valley, Disney hired the best rockwork artisans in the business. Fresh off building Animal Kingdom's rockwork, a team led by Imagineer Zolt Hormeh with artisans around the world spent approximately 2 years growing, sculpting, and painting these mountains.
The attraction covers nearly 6 acres, the largest attraction by acreage at the Disneyland Resort, and half of the entire land. This slot car style ride takes up space.
The 5-minute ride transports guests into the computer-generated world of Cars. A leisurely, scenic tour of Ornament Valley turns into an all-out race for the Piston Cup as guests race side by side through the mountain range, around Willie's Butte and past the plunging waterfall Radiator Falls, all familiar sights to fans of the movie.
When the race begins, racers are on parallel tracks zooming nose to nose through the desert landscape. And part of the thrill is you never know who's going to win, but somebody does.
And when the race is over, Imagineers purposefully included a scene to make everybody feel like a winner. There are no losers at Disneyland.
When the ride debuted, the vehicles represented the most technologically advanced vehicles ever designed and built for a Disney ride. In fact, Disney Imagineers brag that they are probably far superior to anything you'd see on the road now.
There are onboard computer controls for the vehicles, dual processors, loading inputs and outputs. Each vehicle is its own power system, and it picks up electricity from a bus bar system underneath the track. That power is transmitted into an electric motor.
The onboard computer sends commands to the motor through a variable frequency drive, taking the motor to whatever speed it needs to be for that area of the track. The vehicle at any given point knows where it is on the track, how fast it should be going, and has a feedback loop making sure that it's going that speed for where it is.
Then we have an off-board system called the Wayside computer that keeps track of all 31 vehicles on the track. It knows where they all are, monitors their speed, and makes sure they're all going the appropriate speeds in the zones that they should be, so that it's monitoring to make sure there's never a collision on the track.
Of course, this level of technology running every day for years does indeed break down from time to time, but most closures are temporary and they're repaired quickly.
In the attraction's 11 years of being open, it's not changed much. The town has welcomed new characters and changed its live entertainment offerings as new Cars movies have been made, but Radiator Springs Racers, set to the first film, has maintained its timeless quality.
And we sure hope it maintains its charm. It is one of Disney's best examples of combining outdoor thrill ride elements with indoor dark ride elements to create a very satisfying ride experience.
In recent years, the Disney Company and much of the rest of the theme park industry is focusing its research and development on trackless ride vehicles, interactive screen technology, and complicated roller coasters.
But we sure would love to see another slot car styled attraction at a Disney park, and we hope that one day we will.
Outside of Marceline, Missouri is the Disney farm where young Walt and his brother Roy grew up. When Walt was a boy, he experienced what it meant to live a rural farm life. He explored dusty barns, babbling brooks, and the branches of tall trees. There was a large tree behind the barn on the property where Walt would sit and dream of his characters. The Dreaming Tree was eventually dedicated to his legacy. Walt Disney loved nature and the outdoors. From Disneyland's earliest concepts, an island in the center of a mighty river was always present. Originally, the island was meant to be the Mickey Mouse Club Island, a home for the Mickey Mouse Club and the Mouseketeers. Later, it was proposed to be an American history land for miniatures of historic American landmarks such as Independence Hall, Mount Vernon, and Monticello, which would be seen from the Mark Twain riverboat. At one point, Walt considered making it Treasure Island themed. Eventually, Walt decided that among the somewhat passive audience experiences within his Disneyland park, a place for self-guided exploration and spontaneous play was the perfect fit, and his hometown appreciation of Mark Twain and his heroes Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn provided a foundational story for the island. Originally, Disney legend Marvin Davis took a crack at the Tom Sawyer concept, but the boss was not satisfied with the work. He recalled Mr. Disney barking, "Give me that thing," and leaving with the plan sheet. That night in the Red Barn at his Carolwood Avenue home, Walt worked for hours adding the elements he envisioned for Tom Sawyer Island. Davis recalled that on the next morning, Walt laid the original plan with his own vellum overlay on Davis's desk and proclaimed, "Now that's the way it should be." The island was built according to Walt's design. "I put in all the things I wanted to do as a kid and couldn't," Walt said. Walt is also quoted as saying he wanted the island to be for children and for free. During the spring of 1956, Southern California newspapers featured an advertisement of a raft with a pirate skull and crossbones flag making its way to Tom Sawyer Island. The island opened on June 16, 1956, Disneyland's second year. For the opening, two Hannibal, Missouri contest winners, most like Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher, brought water from the Mississippi and soil from Jackson's Island for the ceremony. Following the ceremony, guests were invited to a fish fry with real Missouri catfish. For years, Tom Sawyer, played by different actors, could be found on the island. Disney legend Tom Nab, who helped open Disneyland Paris, started his career as Tom Sawyer on the island. He pestered Walt for the job of playing Tom as a child, and Walt agreed, as long as he maintained a C+ average. And the story goes that Walt did check his report cards personally. Part of the island's charm is that it can only be accessed by raft, an homage to Huckleberry Finn's famous watercraft. After disembarking at Tom's Landing, visitors can explore trails through the wilderness, cross a swaying suspension bridge or bouncing pontoon bridge, and explore the various rock formations and mysterious underground passageways. There are plenty of restful spots to soak up some sunshine, rest in the shade, and enjoy the peaceful waterfront. Photography of this area of the park show a pastoral, secluded setting with hills, paths, and large trees. Everyone knows that Fort Wilderness is closed to the public and is only good for some quiet restrooms, but when the island originally opened, the fort was open and guests were welcome to explore the many levels and gun turrets of the fort. Complete with a gift shop, refreshment stand, and museum-quality officers' quarter displays, the fort was a cool attraction. While the sailing ship Columbia still fires at the fort when it passes, the fort used to fire back. Eventually, the fort fell into disrepair. The original pine logs failed, and the fort had to be dismantled. It was moved much further back on the island and is now just a shadow of the original. Another currently faded feature on the island is Tom and Huck's treehouse. A large concrete and steel tree similar to the ones in Adventureland was constructed at the peak of the island on the southern side. Originally, this was the highest point in Disneyland, and as the trees on the island were fairly small, the treehouse could be seen throughout much of the park. It is fun to visit that tree and imagine that Walt might have been paying homage to the Dreaming Tree when he made the treehouse such a major visual focal point. In a brilliant aesthetic and practical move, 3 streams bubble forth from the roots of this tree down 3 sides of the hill, providing visual and audio interest while also filtering the park water systems. The treehouse could be explored and guests climbed up and down its stairs for decades, imagining what it was like to be Tom and Huck. Today, the treehouse is no longer accessible, although you can climb around the large roots. These days, the treehouse is difficult to be seen from the river due to 60 years of tree growth. Castle Rock is another famous attraction on the island. For years, it was a large rock structure that families could climb with passages leading down into the tunnels and Injun Joe's cave. Today, Castle Rock has been topped with a platform and barrels and boats from a shipwrecked pirate vessel to connect the Pirates of the Caribbean theming. The original island had Injun Joe's cave with its entrance on the southeast side of the island and its exit near where the rafts dock today on the southwest side. Injun Joe's cave was dark and spooky with the sound of wind and the occasional scream piped in. It featured many neat formations, and any kid who experienced it remembers the bridge over a bottomless pit. This was a really cool experience for every kid to have caves of this size to explore in a place like Disneyland. Parents knew their kids were safe, but the caves were so well themed that you still felt a sense of danger and excitement when traveling through them. The northern part of the island originally housed an unfriendly Indian tribe, as opposed to the friendly tribes found in Indian Country, which is where Critter Country is now. An unfriendly native village with a burned-out settler's cabin. This was not something you could explore on foot, but saw from the river vessels that endlessly looped the island. Today, the northern part of the island is much smaller, and the entire river size was reduced to make room for Galaxy's Edge. When the island and river were shrunk, the Indian village was refurbished and made into a friendly Native American tribe. The endlessly burning cabin was extinguished, and the Gully Wumper was permanently docked in front of it. On its opening day, the island featured a fishing dock where guests paid a small fee to fish with a pole and bait, just like Tom and Huck in the stocked rivers of America. While this was a unique and immersive feature of the land, it did not last. Some people blame the processed water killing the fish, and others to the fact that many of the caught fish ended up in lockers and went unclaimed, because who wants to carry around a dead fish at an amusement park? But it was still a great idea, and Walt sure seemed to love it. According to Disneyland press media, there are at least 3 types of fish that still live in the river to this day. An interesting aside, the Rivers of America is actually part of a larger body of water called the Green Water System, which also includes the Jungle Cruise, the Frontierland Entrance Pond and Big Thunder Mountain Pool, the Castle Moats, Storybook Land, and the pond for the defunct motorboat cruise are all connected via underground pipes. Apparently, fish can travel through these pipes and inhabit all of these places. Over the years, the island has been through 2 major renovations. For 30 36 years, Tom Sawyer's Island remained as Walt originally created it, but in the early 1990s, the entertainment division was tasked with creating a nighttime spectacular that included water and fireworks to invigorate this section of the park. The rivers of America were drained and the island was closed for almost 2 years as the meticulous and elaborate construction for a huge extravaganza were completed. Then, in 1992, after a very long wait, Fantasmic opened to the public. The result changed the southern end of the island forever. Harper's Mill was moved, and there was also the refurbishment of the earth-covered show building that housed Injun Joe's Cave. The caves became slightly smaller as some of them became backstage passages for the show. The large Lafitte's Tavern building was also constructed to act as the backdrop for the show stage. The island was changed again 15 years later in 2007. After the success of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, the entire island was closed again and given a new theme and a new name, Pirate's Lair on Tom Sawyer's Island. When it reopened, the entire island had a new look and feel, and the changes made in 1992 made a little more sense to the story. The entire island was re-themed with sea vessels washed ashore and left in the most precarious places. Smuggler's Cove is fun with its interactive attractions and works well with the pre-existing suspension and barrel bridges. Castle Rock is now strewn with sea wreckage. The back half of a large masted ship covers the old secret tunnels that used to feed up into Fort Wilderness. Underneath the ship, you'll find several skeletons and themed rooms that open out to a treasure chest and pirate flag. Injun Joe's Cave is gone, and in its place is Pirate's Lair. Using modern projections and holograms, guests find a pirate's cave and treasure chest with several interactive displays as a reward for their exploration. Appearances by some of the movie characters make the island makeover a lot of fun. Although the original theming may have faded in favor of some Pirates of the Caribbean presence, the island has kept its beauty and sense of seclusion. It still allows visitors to write their own story and create their own adventure while exploring the island on their terms, just as Walt had originally intended. Walt Disney himself once said, "Disneyland is something that will never be finished," and that is probably why Disneyland is still so popular today. Tom Sawyer's Island embodies the best of Disneyland. It honors the past, utilizes the tools of the present, and captures the imagination and the possibilities of the future.
Here you can take in a small museum showcasing Walt and the Disneyland story. Check out the model of what Disneyland looked like when it opened in 1955 and one of the actual Griffith Park benches where Walt was sitting when he came up with the idea of Disneyland in the first place.
Then head out to find Mr. Disney.
The Disneyland Railroad was a long-time passion of Walt Disney, and it greets you as you walk into the park. Start at Main Street Station, where inside a small museum showcasing Walt's love of trains is on display, complete with a replica of the small-scale steam engine Walt created for his home railroad, the Lily Bell.
As you wait for your train, look across the tracks at the bright handcart that Walt picked out himself. Many of the appointments still in the park were handpicked by Walt.
If you really want to have a Walt Disney moment, wait for the number 2 engine, the E.P. Ripley. It is one of the 2 trains that the Walt Disney Studios built themselves, and it is the train that pulled Walt into the station on opening day for his grand entrance.
If you ask for a ride on the tender car, you can see the same engine up close and perhaps feel the thrill that Walt also felt tending to the powerful steam engines.
When constructing Main Street USA on the west side, the workers installing popcorn lights on the facade ran into a problem. They had an odd amount of sockets and were not sure what color to choose to finish it, red or white.
Walt made them create a bicolored lamp to keep the detail and story complete.
Search in Town Square and find the firehouse. Above it is a small private apartment that Walt and the Disney family used during their time at the park. It is owned by the company now, but at times tours have been available at an extra cost to see inside the cranberry red rooms. They are full of fun memorabilia, and it even has Walt's actual grilled cheese maker.
Tours are suspended at the moment, but you can still look up at the window and dream. A light is kept on in perpetuity in the window to represent how Walt Disney's spirit is always present at Disneyland.
Be sure to get up and into Walt's favorite Main Street vehicle, the fire truck. Legend has it that he used to take an occasional spin around town square before park opening.
And take a look at the fire pole. Originally, Walt thought it would be a good show to have a true fire pole connecting his apartment to the firehouse itself. But when some of the younger children proved they could climb right up it and enter his apartment unannounced, he decided it was probably best to seal it off.
Walking down Main Street, USA, take in the gorgeous castle, and for a moment notice that the upper half is actually backwards. The stylings of the upper half of the courtyard match up more directly with the bottom half of the front.
Walt spun the top of the model for the castle and decided he liked that better, so that's how it was built. We think it looks perfect.
This one is our favorite. I think we feel closer to Walt doing this than anything else.
Days before the park opened in 1955, Walt threw a massive party for Lillian in celebration of their wedding anniversary. All the major players in Disneyland and then some attended the soiree titled the Tempest Fugit Celebration.
On an evening that you were in Disneyland, go to the Golden Horseshoe Saloon in Frontierland, where Walt's legendary party once started, and enjoy a snack and imagine that night. There are pictures of Walt, maybe a little tipsy, sitting in his favorite top right box, beaming down on the crowd. And when he was asked to speak, he actually climbed over the box down to the stage.
Be sure to take in all of this delightful theater, including the original light fixtures and ornaments that Lillian and Walt picked out themselves. The shows have changed, but this iconic theater is very much still the same.
After a show, dinner, and dancing at Slewfoot Sue's, the crowd headed over to the Mark Twain, which you should do, for a nighttime cruise around the rivers of America. It must have been heady. They were about to open up a huge park, and exciting and magical.
Climb up to the second deck and look at the inner chamber. Here, a bar would have been set up, serving mint juleps to Walt and his friends, and then go over to the small stage where so many giants of the jazz world have played, and imagine the dancing and revelry.
As you search through Frontierland, locate the Petrified Tree, the oldest item in Disneyland. For years, the legend was told of how Walt bought the tree for Lillian, who couldn't fit it on her mantelpiece, so she donated it to Disneyland.
The truth is, Walt purchased it himself from a private petrified forest on a trip across Colorado and had it delivered directly to the park. But I stop and think about what a showman and marketing genius Walt was and how much he loved Lillian. He wanted the world to think she was the generous one and adore her just like he did.
Take a raft on over to Tom Sawyer's Island. It may have a Pirates of the Caribbean overlay now, but much of the original experience is still there. This is one of the only attractions at Disneyland Walt himself put pen to paper to help design. Much of the island is just as he thought it should be.
The island was a pastoral escape from the chaos of the park, a place for exploration, nature, and adventure, and it still is.
Take a ride on the Storybook Land canal boats. Walt loved models and miniatures. They were part of the language of his trade, and he kept looking for a place in the park to set up an extensive display. Inspired by his visit to Maduro Dam in Den Haag, Walt had a passion for this ride.
Sure, Arendelle arrived, but so much is still the same as Walt's original. There are tiny leaded glass windows in the church by Alice's Rabbit Hole, the original Cinderella's castle, and Geppetto's Village, the inspiration for the 1983 New Fantasyland refurbishment.
Walt was there to open two rides that were almost the same when Mr. Disney rode them. When waiting in line for Alice in Wonderland, think about the opening ceremony Walt did with the Wonderland characters and the original Alice, Catherine Beaumont, whose voice can be heard on the ride.
And as you take in the grand facade of It's a Small World, think about Walt, who opened the ride at Disneyland with a massive ceremony, bringing children from all around the world to deliver water from their home countries to be part of the ride's river.
Head to Tomorrowland and find the loading platform for the monorail so you can take in the vista of one of the biggest expansions of the park under Walt's guidance. Still here today is the monorail, the submarine voyage, an updated Autopia, and the Matterhorn bobsleds, all which stand invitingly before you. They were all part of the plussing and some of the original e-ticket attractions at the park.
As you ride the monorail, you're riding the first one built in the Western Hemisphere and one of the biggest challenges the Disney Imagineers ever tackled. Walt took then Vice President Nixon on the opening day circuit himself.
As you ride and enjoy Finding Nemo's submarine voyage, you were on Walt's sub fleet, just repainted yellow. He was so proud of the subs, calling the 8 ships one of the largest peacetime fleets ever assembled. It gave him a chance to work with naval admirals and the same company that built submarines for the Navy in order to realize this ambitious project.
Riding the Matterhorn bobsleds was a thrill that Walt enjoyed tackling himself. He even rode the ride with royalty, taking the Shah of Iran for a spin. Of course, it was his idea to build the Swiss mountain after a trip to the glacial paradise during a film shoot.
The head-calculated and hand-bent tubular track has never been completely replaced, only repaired over the years, so you're getting pretty much the same ride as you always have, even if the scenery around it has evolved.
The updated Autopia track was designed to ride over the submarine voyage and under the monorail tracks, all while creating green space. Good job, Walt.
Walt rode Jungle Cruise countless times, another one of his favorites. The ride is dramatically different in look and feel, but there are several scenes that Walt oversaw the inclusion of that are still here. The Indian elephant bathing pool, the African veldt, and especially Schweitzer Falls are just like they were when Walt was riding the rivers.
The Enchanted Tiki Room may be the least changed major attraction at Disneyland, opening in 1963. It was Walt's idea, a major technological achievement, and like the park itself, Walt had to invest his personal capital to get the project completed. Be sure to stop by for a tropical serenade.
The Tarzan overlay tells a very different story now, but Walt's biggest treehouse is still the core of the experience. Walt themed the original tree to the Swiss Family Robinson, one of his best live-action films. Think about him giving a tour of the massive treehouse to the cast of the movie as you climb its branches.
If you're getting hungry, we like to head over to the Plaza Inn on the Hub for one of Walt's favorite meals and one of his favorite restaurants.
There are a lot of dining homages inside Disneyland to Walt, the complex man with simple tastes. From drinks and dishes at the Carthay Circle and Club 33, Walt's chili at the Carnation Cafe, or grilled cheese and tomato soup at the Jolly Holiday. But if you want to eat where Walt did, head to the Plaza Inn to order his favorite, the fried chicken.
The spot opened as the Red Wagon Inn and was leased by Swift Meats, though Walt upgraded it to the Plaza Inn in 1965 once he had control of the space. It was appointed by chandeliers picked by Lillian Disney that are said to drip from the antique ceiling.
Walt was also fond of having a milkshake at the ice cream parlor, which used to be part of the Carnation Cafe. He was often found in one of its booths. You can recreate this feeling at Gibson Girls Ice Cream on your visit.
And be sure to stop by a cart and get some popcorn, Walt's favorite park snack.
Take a ride on Pirates of the Caribbean and keep Walt Disney in your mind. It is often regarded as his last attraction, as he had a major influence on its development but did not survive to see it open. And at the same time, it was the first ride that the Imagineers had to complete without his leadership.
As you wind through the tunnels, consider Walt doing the same in a special rolling rig that allowed him to experience the ride early before it was filled with water, specially made for him. Despite his illness, he still loved the ride and gave positive feedback to his team, commending them for creating something that people would want to ride again and again, as they would catch something new every time. He was very proud of the achievement.
Well, everybody, how did you do? We hope that you can collect all of these Walt Disney moments during your next visit to Disneyland.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a comment with your favorite Walt moment inside Disneyland.
See you real soon, Mouseketeers.
See you real soon.